Hi guys, my name is Anna, you're watching simcue, and without further ado, let's get into this video. So today we are building what I find to be a very interesting build. This house is designed by the Danish designer Arne Jacobsen back in 1969. It's called Kubeflex, which kind of translates to Kubeflex, and the idea was to have a prefabricated modular build that you could then assemble on the lot by pretty much anyone. So it would be fast and cheap and really quick and easy to just set up a new house. So this is the reason the build is kind of made up of these 6 cubes. It has this sort of green shell and then these white walls or separate parts that is made up of. And so first I tried to mimic that by making the entire house green. I looked through a bit to find a color that I found matched the best. And then secondly, I tried to mimic the white parts just with curtains. And that worked out quite nicely for these large walls. But when it came to the walls that kind of have these smaller windows where the white parts are both on top and underneath, it didn't really work out with curtains. So what you're seeing me struggle with right here is actually signs from Dino that I'm desperately sizing up and down with the tool mod, trying to get it to work out. And for a short while, I was satisfied, but I will be going back to it. The walls inside are technically the same thing, so they would be green on the side and then have this white panel in the middle, but I couldn't really put the things inside as well. It would take up like too much space, so I did decide to just go with a fully white panel. And now we are back to the dine out signs. Here I am instead sizing them up to the scale of 1.1, and then to avoid any glitching I am sizing the middle one to 1.099 because that means that visually it's not really smaller, but in the game it's just that teeny tiny bit smaller so that you don't have a visual glitch. And while that did seem to work out, it was also a bit fiddly and I didn't really like that you could see so many lines. So I was happy when I found this one from the sleek bathroom kit. You can find them in the shelf category, but they are actually placed on the floor, so I'm just raising them up. But I then ran into a new problem. So what you can quickly see here is that when I lower the walls, they don't disappear. And I hadn't even considered that, but that now meant that the build was just completely unplayable, which was definitely not what I was going for. So one way I tried to fix this was to place an upper floor, place all of these shelves on that floor, so on the first floor, and then lower them with the tool mod. And this is in general a thing that you can do if you have any like visual interference with your game, but you still technically want the piece for the overall look. But for this, it simply just didn't work out because the build technically doesn't have a second floor, so you would never be on the second floor, and they're now only visible when the second floor or first floor. I mix that up so many times because I know that for some people it's the second floor, for me it's technically the first floor. The upper floor, it doesn't have an upper floor, so you would actually never see them, and instead you would just see these really ugly dark shadows. But the sleek bathroom also comes with an actual wall hanging shelf, and if you sized it up, it took up one entire tile and it was still really nice and tileable. So placing it at the right height meant that all I had to do was just rotate every single piece 90 degrees with the tool mod and it would be flush against the wall. And I was so happy about this because this also generally looked good around these windows. So this was definitely what worked the best, and it is what we're going to stick with because these don't show when you lower the walls. Again, since the idea is that this is modular, that also meant that you could kind of see around the white part like a black frame. And I did want to add that to add an extra detail, and also because the white now looked a little too much of a pop out to me. So I found this really nice little actually base game debug piece almost looking like a small column, because I wouldn't be able to place actual columns because this was now on the like half tiles and columns only go strictly on the grid for the full tiles, so that wouldn't work. So I was very happy when I found these small ones. But I did find that they looked a little bit weird without having the top part of the frame, and the way I fixed it was to add a platform to the upper level and then add like a floor trim, so that became like the top frame. It goes all the way around, where technically in the corners in real life it it's not visible, like there isn't a frame there, but I was happy to make this sacrifice. So I then went around and lowered every single shelf by I think 0.15, and then they actually matched with the floor trim. So we're now getting some roof down, and it has quite a unique roof. I actually just shortly before this read up on it a little bit because I couldn't really figure out the roofing situation, and the reason is that this is actually heated from above, which sounds a little bit weird because if you know anything about physics, you would also know that heating, like hot air, rises to the top, so that's why it's much more common obviously to have floor heating. But for this, the idea was that if you made it circulate properly and then heated it from on top, it would be a lot easier to install. So I'm not 100% sure, but I assume that that is the reason for that weird shape. So it's kind of dragging in air, heating it up, and then circulating it, and probably also in general ventilating the air, which is nice and very well thought out for 1969. So we've now moved on to the bathroom and hallway cube. So this was one of the mandatory cubes. If you wanted to order the house, you would need a bathroom / hallway, a kitchen, and a third room to have anything shipped. But the house was actually never put into production. The design was very ahead of its time, and when it was showcased on the Standard House Fair in 1970, no one really seemed to like it that much. It was criticised for not really being family friendly, but even more so, it was criticised for not being pretty enough. Very quickly, I just want to comment on the way I did this curtain. So what you saw me do was just delete all of the walls around it so that the curtain doesn't really snap to any wall. Then you can just alt place it and then put the walls back in. Next, I'm fiddling around with the tool mod, trying to get a vertical mirror that is a little bit longer than the one that is already vertical in the base game, but it got this weird lighting glitch because it's now technically placed in the wall. So I did end up just going for the base game mirror. Anyway, we are quickly choosing some flooring and then we will be moving into the kitchen, but I want to comment a little bit more on the build itself. So in real life, each of these cubes measure exactly 3.36 meters times 3.36 meters. I will put on the screen what that is in other metrics. But the reason for that was that Arne Jacobsen found that that was the maximum that you could put on a lorry. So the idea was that this was not only going to be prefabricated, it was also going to be cheap, it was going to be easy to ship, and it was going to be easy to assemble. And I just cannot fathom how this was never put into production. There is only this one prototype which was at the showcase, and after that it has been used by the Jacobsen family as a summer house, and then I think it was back in like 2005 that the Danish museum Trapholt acquired it, and they did a little bit of renovation, got it back to what it used to look like back in 1970, and that is now where you can come and visit it. But it just baffles me how this was never picked back up, because I feel like by today's standards, this is genius. Something quick, something cheap, something that everyone can order and assemble themselves. This house with 6 cubes was supposed to be able to be assembled by 2 people in just a week. And with housing prices today, I feel like so many people would be willing, we're already seeing it with like the tiny house movement, so many people would be willing to scale down if it meant having a house of their own that was actually affordable. But like I said, it never became a thing. So if you ever find yourself in Kolding here in Denmark, I would very highly recommend that you go and visit Trapholt and see this for yourself. But it's probably important to know that right now the museum is closed until 2027 because it's undergoing major renovations. So you can't go right now, but otherwise I highly recommend it. And I was very glad that I got to go one last time before the museum closed down. So right now we're working on the living room, which does consist of 2 cubes. Now I was struggling a little bit with the furniture because Arne Jacobsen is probably most known for some of his furniture designs, especially his 2 chairs, the swan and the egg. And he of course filled the house with his own designs. So even though I couldn't obviously get the same thing, I was kind of looking through the catalogue to find something that could somehow mimic it or at least look very designer. So right here we're going through the chair elimination. This is a general thing that I do. I just don't always show it. But basically I get out everything that I feel like could work, and then I have a look at them because I feel like looking at all of them at the same time is the best way to really figure out which one I prefer. Now, I wouldn't really say that I was surprised, but I guess I was kind of reminded of just how well Dream Home Decorator and also Businesses and Hobbies works for a more Scandinavian look. Nordhaven is specifically inspired by Scandinavia, and I would say specifically inspired by the Danish capital Copenhagen, but we can get into that later. So I did find that these two packs, Dream Home Decorator, just because it's so modern, and Businesses and Hobbies because it's very focused on Danish design, or at least more of a Scandinavian look, that those two packs just work so well for this space. So this is the children's room, but we are quickly moving on to the master bedroom. In both bedrooms, there are these shelves that I've placed that are to mimic a windowsill. Because in his design, Arne Jacobsen was very focused on making everything highly functional. So in real life, there's just a slightly deeper windowsill that works as a desk. So the way that I pulled this off was to place a laptop on a regular desk and then size down the desk so much that it could fit within the wall. This way, both the laptop and the chair are snapping to that small desk, and it should still work completely fine, but it looks like your sim is actually sitting at this windowsill / shelf. So you just saw me place a couple of lamps from Businesses and Hobbies. These definitely reminded me of a very specific Arne Jacobsen lamp that I don't remember the name of, but I will hopefully be able to put it on the screen. We are now getting more into decoration, so this is also where I am more so freehanding things. In real life, it's very bare because no one is living there. It's just a part of a museum, but I obviously want you to be able to use it as a regular house, so that's why I wanted to add some decor to make it come to life a little bit more. For example, here in the hallway, in real life, it's definitely a bit more narrow, and I was in general thinking about should I go for like 4x4 tiles or only 3x3, but since I did go for 4x4, that also meant that the hallway is now a little bit bigger, so I thought it made sense to actually add some furniture, even though in real life it's just completely bare. So our last little detail will be light switches. Normally I don't really bother to put them in, but for some reason I just found that they were very fitting for this build. So even though I went and visited this myself not too long ago, I actually forgot to take any pictures. So as per usual, you can find attributions in the description down below, and there you will also be able to find a link that is actually for an English website that describes just a little bit more about this house if you are interested. So the minimal landscaping you're seeing me doing is also just something that I came up with again in real life. It's just next to a museum, so it's very bare, but I did decide to add a terrace because I thought that that might be nice for gameplay. For the terrace, I still wanted to kind of match the style or the vibe of the house, so I wanted to be kind of bold with some of my color choices, because there's definitely been a time where people were a lot more bold with color choices, so I ended up going with just a glass table and then these very blue chairs from City Living, but I actually really love it. And I also found that you could get a grill that matched the exact same blue. Anyway, we are getting very close to a little short digital tour of this place. I really hope that you enjoy these more architectural focused videos, because I really enjoy doing these builds and also looking more into architecture myself. So I will leave you to the digital tour. I wish you a lovely day. I hope to see you next time, and bye!